Consciousness is the state or quality of awareness, or, of being aware of an external object or something within oneself. It has been defined variously in terms of sentience, awareness, qualia, subjectivity, the ability to experience or to feel, wakefulness, having a sense of selfhood or soul, the fact that there is something that it is like to have or be it, and the executive control system of the mind. In contemporary philosophy, its definition is often hinted at via the logical possibility of its absence, the philosophical zombie, which is defined as a being whose behavior and function are identical to one's own, yet there is no one in there experiencing it. Despite the difficulty in definition, many philosophers believe that there is a broadly shared underlying intuition about what consciousness is. As Max Velmans and Susan Schneider wrote in the Blackwell Companion to Consciousness, anything that we are aware of at a given moment forms part of our consciousness, making conscious experience at once the most familiar and most mysterious aspect of our lives. Western philosophers, since the time of Descartes and Locke, have struggled to comprehend the nature of consciousness and identify its essential properties. Issues of concern in the philosophy of consciousness include whether the concept is fundamentally coherent, whether consciousness can ever be explained mechanistically, whether non-human consciousness exists and if so how can it be recognized, how consciousness relates to language, whether consciousness can be understood in a way that does not require a dualistic distinction between mental and physical states or properties, and whether it may ever be possible for computing machines like computers or robots to be conscious, a topic studied in the field of artificial intelligence. Thanks to developments in technology over the past few decades, consciousness has become a significant topic of interdisciplinary research in cognitive science, with significant contributions from fields such as psychology, anthropology, neuropsychology, and neuroscience. The primary focus is on understanding what it means biologically and psychologically for information to be present in consciousness, that is, on determining the neural and psychological correlates of consciousness. The majority of experimental studies assess consciousness in humans by asking subjects for a verbal report of their experiences, e.g., "Tell me if you notice anything when I do this." Issues of interest include phenomena such as subliminal perception, blind sight, denial of impairment, and altered states of consciousness produced by alcohol and other drugs, or spiritual or meditative techniques. In medicine, consciousness is assessed by observing a patient's arousal and responsiveness, and can be seen as a continuum of states ranging from full alertness and comprehension, through disorientation, delirium, loss of meaningful communication, and finally loss of movement in response to painful stimuli. Issues of practical concern include how the presence of consciousness can be assessed in severely ill, comatose, or anesthetized people, and how to treat conditions in which consciousness is impaired or disrupted. The degree of consciousness is then measured by the Glasgow Coma Scale. Etymology. The origin of the modern concept of consciousness is often attributed to John Locke's essay concerning human understanding, published in 1690. Locke defined consciousness as the perception of what passes in a man's own mind. His essay influenced the 18th century view of consciousness, and his definition appeared in Samuel Johnson's celebrated dictionary, 1755. Consciousness, French, conscience, is also defined in the 1753 volume of Diderot and d'Alembert's Encyclopédie, as the opinion or internal feeling that we ourselves have from what we do. The earliest English language uses of conscious and consciousness date back, however, to the 1500s. The English word conscious originally derived from the Latin conscius, con together and cio to know, but the Latin word did not have the same meaning as our word. It meant knowing with, in other words having joint or common knowledge with another. There were, however, many occurrences in Latin writings of the phrase conscius sibi, which translates literally as knowing with oneself, or in other words sharing knowledge with oneself about something. This phrase had the figurative meaning of knowing that one knows, as the modern English word conscious does. In its earliest uses in the 1500s, the English word conscious retained the meaning of the Latin conscius. For example, Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan wrote, "Where two, or more men, know of one and the same fact, they are said to be conscious of it one to another." The Latin phrase conscius sibi, whose meaning was more closely related to the current concept of consciousness, was rendered in English as conscious to oneself or conscious unto oneself. For example, Archbishop Usher wrote in 1613 of being so conscious unto myself of my great weakness. Locke's definition from 1690 illustrates that a gradual shift in meaning had taken place. A related word was conscientia, which primarily means moral conscience. In the literal sense, conscientia means knowledge with, that is, shared knowledge. The word first appears in Latin juridical texts by writers such as Cicero. Here, conscientia is the knowledge that a witness has of the deed of someone else. René Descartes, 1596–1650, is generally taken to be the first philosopher to use conscientia in a way that does not fit this traditional meaning. Descartes used conscientia the way modern speakers would use conscience. In Search After Truth, reguli ad directionem ingenia ut et inquisitio veritatis per lumen naturale, Amsterdam 1701, he says conscience or internal testimony, conscientia, vel interno testimonio. In the dictionary. The dictionary meaning of the word consciousness extends through several centuries and associated cognate meanings which have ranged from formal definitions to somewhat more skeptical definitions. One formal definition indicating the range of these cognate meanings is given in Webster's Third New International Dictionary, stating that consciousness is awareness or perception of an inward psychological or spiritual fact, intuitively perceived knowledge of something in one's inner self. Inward awareness of an external object, state, or fact. Concerned awareness, interest, concern often used with an attributive noun. The state or activity that is characterized by sensation, emotion, volition, or thought, mind in the broadest possible sense, something in nature that is distinguished from the physical. The totality in psychology of sensations, perceptions, ideas, attitudes, and feelings of which an individual or a group is aware at any given time or within a particular time span. Compare stream of consciousness. Philosophy of mind. The philosophy of mind has given rise to many stances regarding consciousness. The Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy in 1998 defines consciousness as follows. Consciousness philosophers have used the term consciousness for four main topics: knowledge in general, intentionality, introspection, and the knowledge it specifically generates, and phenomenal experience. Something within one's mind is introspectively conscious just in case one introspects it, or is poised to do so. Introspection is often thought to deliver one's primary knowledge of one's mental life. An experience or other mental entity is phenomenally conscious just in case there is something it is like for one to have it. The clearest examples are perceptual experience, such as tastings and seeings, bodily sensational experiences, such as those of pains, tickles and itches, imaginative experiences, such as those of one's own actions or perceptions, and streams of thought, as in the experience of thinking in words or in images. Introspection and phenomenality seem independent, or dissociable, although this is controversial. In a more skeptical definition of consciousness, Stuart Sutherland has exemplified some of the difficulties in fully ascertaining all of its cognate meanings in his entry for the 1989 version of the Macmillan Dictionary of Psychology. Consciousness: the having of perceptions, thoughts, and feelings, awareness. The term is impossible to define except in terms that are unintelligible without a grasp of what consciousness means. Many fall into the trap of equating consciousness with self-consciousness. To be conscious, it is only necessary to be aware of the external world. Consciousness is a fascinating but elusive phenomenon. It is impossible to specify what it is, what it does, or why it has evolved. Nothing worth reading has been written on it. Most writers on the philosophy of consciousness have been concerned with defending a particular point of view, and have organized their material accordingly. For surveys, the most common approach is to follow a historical path by associating stances with the philosophers who are most strongly associated with them, for example Descartes, Locke, Kant, etc. An alternative is to organize philosophical stances according to basic issues. The coherence of the concept. Philosophers and non-philosophers differ in their intuitions about what consciousness is. While most people have a strong intuition for the existence of what they refer to as consciousness, skeptics argue that this intuition is false, either because the concept of consciousness is intrinsically incoherent, or because our intuitions about it are based in illusions. Gilbert Ryle, for example, argued that traditional understanding of consciousness depends on a Cartesian dualist outlook that improperly distinguishes between mind and body, or between mind and world. He proposed that we speak not of minds, bodies, and the world, but of individuals, or persons, acting in the world. Thus, by speaking of consciousness we end up misleading ourselves by thinking that there is any sort of thing as consciousness separated from behavioral and linguistic understandings. More generally, many philosophers and scientists have been unhappy about the difficulty of producing a definition that does not involve circularity or fuzziness. Types of consciousness. Many philosophers have argued that consciousness is a unitary concept that is understood intuitively by the majority of people in spite of the difficulty in defining it. Others, though, have argued that the level of disagreement about the meaning of the word indicates that it either means different things to different people, for instance, the objective versus subjective aspects of consciousness, or else is an umbrella term encompassing a variety of distinct meanings with no simple element in common. Ned Block proposed a distinction between two types of consciousness that he called phenomenal, P-consciousness, and access, A-consciousness. P-consciousness, according to Block, is simply raw experience. It is moving, colored forms, sounds, sensations, emotions and feelings with our bodies and responses at the center. These experiences, considered independently of any impact on behavior, are called qualia. A-consciousness, on the other hand, is the phenomenon whereby information in our minds is accessible for verbal report, reasoning, and the control of behavior. So, when we perceive, information about what we perceive is access conscious. When we introspect, information about our thoughts is access conscious. When we remember, information about the past is access conscious, and so on. Although some philosophers, such as Daniel Dennett, have disputed the validity of this distinction, others have broadly accepted it. David Chalmers has argued that A-consciousness can in principle be understood in mechanistic terms, but that understanding P-consciousness is much more challenging. He calls this the hard problem of consciousness. Some philosophers believe that Block's two types of consciousness are not the end of the story. William Leakin, for example, argued in his book Consciousness and Experience that at least 8 clearly distinct types of consciousness can be identified: organism consciousness, control consciousness, consciousness of, state/event consciousness, reportability, introspective consciousness, subjective consciousness, self-consciousness, and that even this list omits several more obscure forms. There is also debate over whether or not A-consciousness and P-consciousness always coexist or if they can exist separately. Although P-consciousness without A-consciousness is more widely accepted, there have been some hypothetical examples of A without P. Block, for instance, suggests the case of a zombie that is computationally identical to a person but without any subjectivity. However, he remains somewhat skeptical, concluding, "I don't know whether there are any actual cases of A consciousness without P consciousness, but I hope I have illustrated their conceptual possibility." Forms of consciousness. While philosophers tend to focus on types of consciousness that occur in the mind, in other disciplines such as sociology the emphasis is on the practical meaning of consciousness. In this vein, it is possible to identify 4 forms of consciousness. Sensory experience, the phenomenal sense that something exists in relation to, or has an impact on, a person. The concept of affect attests to this kind of consciousness, as does sense data. Practical consciousness, or knowing how to do things, knowing how to go on. As writers as different as Wittgenstein and Marx have elaborated, it is basic to human engagement. Reflective consciousness, the modality in which people reflect upon the first 2 forms. It is the stuff of ordinary philosophy and day-to-day thinking about what has been done and what is to be done. Reflexive consciousness, or reflecting on the basis of reflection, and interrogating the nature of knowing in the context of the constitutive conditions of being. Mind-body problem. Mental processes, such as consciousness, and physical processes, such as brain events, seem to be correlated, but what is the basis of this connection and correlation between what seem to be 2 very different kinds of processes? The first influential philosopher to discuss this question specifically was Descartes, and the answer he gave is known as Cartesian dualism. Descartes proposed that consciousness resides within an immaterial domain he called residential cogitans, the realm of thought, in contrast to the domain of material things, which he called residential extensa, the realm of extension. He suggested that the interaction between these 2 domains occurs inside the brain, perhaps in a small midline structure called the pineal gland. Although it is widely accepted that Descartes explained the problem cogently, few later philosophers have been happy with his solution, and his ideas about the pineal gland have especially been ridiculed. However, no alternative solution has gained general acceptance. Proposed solutions can be divided broadly into 2 categories: dualist solutions that maintain Descartes' rigid distinction between the realm of consciousness and the realm of matter but give different answers for how the 2 realms relate to each other, and monist solutions that maintain that there is really only one realm of being, of which consciousness and matter are both aspects. Each of these categories itself contains numerous variants. The 2 main types of dualism are substance dualism, which holds that the mind is formed of a distinct type of substance not governed by the laws of physics, and property dualism, which holds that the laws of physics are universally valid but cannot be used to explain the mind. The 3 main types of monism are physicalism, which holds that the mind consists of matter organized in a particular way, idealism, which holds that only thought or experience truly exists, and matter is merely an illusion, and neutral monism, which holds that both mind and matter are aspects of a distinct essence that is itself identical to neither of them. There are also, however, a large number of idiosyncratic theories that cannot cleanly be assigned to any of these schools of thought. Since the dawn of Newtonian science with its vision of simple mechanical principles governing the entire universe, some philosophers have been tempted by the idea that consciousness could be explained in purely physical terms. The first influential writer to propose such an idea explicitly was Julien Offray de la Métrie, in his book Man a Machine, L'Homme Machine. His arguments, however, were very abstract. The most influential modern physical theories of consciousness are based on psychology and neuroscience. Theories proposed by neuroscientists such as Gerald Edelman and Antonio Damasio, and by philosophers such as Daniel Dennett, seek to explain consciousness in terms of neural events occurring within the brain. Many other neuroscientists, such as Christoph Koch, have explored the neural basis of consciousness without attempting to frame all-encompassing global theories. At the same time, computer scientists working in the field of artificial intelligence have pursued the goal of creating digital computer programs that can simulate or embody consciousness. A few theoretical physicists have argued that classical physics is intrinsically incapable of explaining the holistic aspects of consciousness, but that quantum theory may provide the missing ingredients. Several theorists have therefore proposed quantum mind, QM, theories of consciousness. Notable theories falling into this category include the holonomic brain theory of Karl Pribram and David Bohm, and the orchestra or theory formulated by Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose. Some of these QM theories offer descriptions of phenomenal consciousness, as well as QM interpretations of access consciousness. None of the quantum mechanical theories has been confirmed by experiment. Recent publications by G. Gareschi, JCIA, S. Popescu, and H. Briegel could falsify proposals such as those of Hameroff, which rely on quantum entanglement in protein. At the present time, many scientists and philosophers consider the arguments for an important role of quantum phenomena to be unconvincing. Apart from the general question of the hard problem of consciousness, roughly speaking, the question of how mental experience arises from a physical basis, a more specialized question is how to square the subjective notion that we are in control of our decisions, at least in some small measure, with the customary view of causality that subsequent events are caused by prior events. The topic of free will is the philosophical and scientific examination of this conundrum. Problem of other minds. Many philosophers consider experience to be the essence of consciousness, and believe that experience can only fully be known from the inside, subjectively. But if consciousness is subjective and not visible from the outside, why do the vast majority of people believe that other people are conscious, but rocks and trees are not? This is called the problem of other minds. It is particularly acute for people who believe in the possibility of philosophical zombies, that is, people who think it is possible in principle to have an entity that is physically indistinguishable from a human being and behaves like a human being in every way but nevertheless lacks consciousness. Related issues have also been studied extensively by Greg Littman of the University of Illinois and Colin Allen, a professor at Indiana University, regarding the literature and research studying artificial intelligence in androids. The most commonly given answer is that we attribute consciousness to other people because we see that they resemble us in appearance and behavior. We reason that if they look like us and act like us, they must be like us in other ways, including having experiences of the sort that we do. There are, however, a variety of problems with that explanation. For one thing, it seems to violate the principle of parsimony, by postulating an invisible entity that is not necessary to explain what we observe. Some philosophers, such as Daniel Dennett in an essay titled The Unimagined Preposterousness of Zombies, argue that people who give this explanation do not really understand what they are saying. More broadly, philosophers who do not accept the possibility of zombies generally believe that consciousness is reflected in behavior, including verbal behavior, and that we attribute consciousness on the basis of behavior. A more straightforward way of saying this is that we attribute experiences to people because of what they can do, including the fact that they can tell us about their experiences. Animal consciousness. The topic of animal consciousness is beset by a number of difficulties. It poses the problem of other minds in an especially severe form, because non-human animals, lacking the ability to express human language, cannot tell us about their experiences. Also, it is difficult to reason objectively about the question, because a denial that an animal is conscious is often taken to imply that it does not feel, its life has no value, and that harming it is not morally wrong. Descartes, for example, has sometimes been blamed for mistreatment of animals due to the fact that he believed only humans have a non-physical mind. Most people have a strong intuition that some animals, such as cats and dogs, are conscious, while others, such as insects, are not, but the sources of this intuition are not obvious, and are often based on personal interactions with pets and other animals they have observed. Philosophers who consider subjective experience the essence of consciousness also generally believe, as a correlate, that the existence and nature of animal consciousness can never rigorously be known. Thomas Nagel spelled out this point of view in an influential essay titled "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" He said that an organism is conscious if and only if there is something that it is like to be that organism, something it is like for the organism, and he argued that no matter how much we know about an animal's brain and behavior, we can never really put ourselves into the mind of the animal and experience its world in the way it does itself. Other thinkers, such as Douglas Hofstadter, dismiss this argument as incoherent. Several psychologists and ethologists have argued for the existence of animal consciousness by describing a range of behaviors that appear to show animals holding beliefs about things they cannot directly perceive. Donald Griffin's 2001 book Animal Minds reviews a substantial portion of the evidence. On July 7, 2012, eminent scientists from different branches of neuroscience gathered at the University of Cambridge to celebrate the Francis Crick Memorial Conference, which deals with consciousness in humans and prelinguistic consciousness in non-human animals. After the conference, they signed in the presence of Stephen Hawking, the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, which summarizes the most important findings of the survey. We decided to reach a consensus and make a statement directed to the public that is not scientific. It's obvious to everyone in this room that animals have consciousness, but it is not obvious to the rest of the world. It is not obvious to the rest of the Western world or the Far East. It is not obvious to the society. Convergent evidence indicates that non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, and other creatures, have the necessary neural substrates of consciousness and the capacity to exhibit intentional behaviors. Artifact consciousness. The idea of an artifact made conscious is an ancient theme of mythology, appearing for example in the Greek myth of Pygmalion, who carved a statue that was magically brought to life, and in medieval Jewish stories of the golem, a magically animated homunculus built of clay. However, the possibility of actually constructing a conscious machine was probably first discussed by Ada Lovelace, in a set of notes written in 1842 about the analytical engine invented by Charles Babbage, a precursor, never built, to modern electronic computers. Lovelace was essentially dismissive of the idea that a machine such as the analytical engine could think in a human-like way. She wrote, "It is desirable to guard against the possibility of exaggerated ideas that might arise as to the powers of the analytical engine. The analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. It can follow analysis, but it has no power of anticipating any analytical relations or truths. Its province is to assist us in making available what we are already acquainted with." One of the most influential contributions to this question was an essay written in 1950 by pioneering computer scientist Alan Turing, titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence. Turing disavowed any interest in terminology, saying that even "can machines think" is too loaded with spurious connotations to be meaningful, but he proposed to replace all such questions with a specific operational test, which has become known as the Turing test. To pass the test, a computer must be able to imitate a human well enough to fool interrogators. In his essay, Turing discussed a variety of possible objections, and presented a counter-argument to each of them. The Turing test is commonly cited in discussions of artificial intelligence as a proposed criterion for machine consciousness. It has provoked a great deal of philosophical debate. For example, Daniel Dennett and Douglas Hofstadter argue that anything capable of passing the Turing test is necessarily conscious, while David Chalmers argues that a philosophical zombie could pass the test, yet fail to be conscious. A third group of scholars have argued that with technological growth, once machines begin to display any substantial signs of human-like behavior, then the dichotomy of human consciousness compared to human-like consciousness becomes passé, and issues of machine autonomy begin to prevail even as observed in its nascent form within contemporary industry and technology. Jürgen Schmidt-Huber argues that consciousness is simply the result of compression. As an agent sees representation of itself recurring in the environment, the compression of this representation can be called consciousness. In a lively exchange over what has come to be referred to as the Chinese room argument, John Searle sought to refute the claim of proponents of what he calls strong artificial intelligence, AI, that a computer program can be conscious, though he does agree with advocates of weak AI that computer programs can be formatted to simulate conscious states. His own view is that consciousness has subjective, first-person causal powers by being essentially intentional due simply to the way human brains function biologically. Conscious persons can perform computations, but consciousness is not inherently computational the way computer programs are. To make a Turing machine that speaks Chinese, Searle imagines a room with one monolingual English speaker, Searle himself, in fact, a book that designates a combination of Chinese symbols to be output paired with Chinese symbol input, and boxes filled with Chinese symbols. In this case, the English speaker is acting as a computer and the rulebook as a program. Searle argues that with such a machine, he would be able to process the inputs to outputs perfectly without having any understanding of Chinese, nor having any idea what the questions and answers could possibly mean. If the experiment were done in English, since Searle knows English, he would be able to take questions and give answers without any algorithms for English questions, and he would be effectively aware of what was being said and the purposes it might serve. Searle would pass the Turing test of answering the questions in both languages, but he is only conscious of what he is doing when he speaks English. Another way of putting the argument is to say that computer programs can pass the Turing test for processing the syntax of a language, but that the syntax cannot lead to semantic meaning in the way strong AI advocates hoped. In the literature concerning artificial intelligence, Searle's essay has been second only to Turing's in the volume of debate it has generated. Searle himself was vague about what extra ingredients it would take to make a machine conscious. All he proposed was that what was needed was causal powers of the sort that the brain has and that computers lack. But other thinkers sympathetic to his basic argument have suggested that the necessary, though perhaps still not sufficient, extra conditions may include the ability to pass not just the verbal version of the Turing test, but the robotic version, which requires grounding the robot's words in the robot's sensory-motor capacity to categorize and interact with the things in the world that its words are about, Turing indistinguishably from a real person. Turing-scale robotics is an empirical branch of research on embodied cognition and situated cognition. In 2014, Viktor Argonov has suggested a non-Turing test for machine consciousness based on machines' ability to produce philosophical judgments. He argues that a deterministic machine must be regarded as conscious if it is able to produce judgments on all problematic properties of consciousness, such as.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.